It was a Tuesday morning in Abidjan. The sun rose, casting a warm glow over the Plateau district. People were heading to work. The usual sounds of a city waking filled the air. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Yet something fundamental had already shifted without the knowledge of the soft breeze. The mastermind behind this coup is a total badass. Like, can someone tell me how the hell he got the idea to do reverse engineering in politics? It's just unthinkable how he pulled that off without firing a shot. You heard me right. Did he torture the president? No. Did he shot him? No. Did he humiliate him? Definitely. But in a diplomatic way no one saw coming. So we had Batman in the military all along. He simply defied the odds, and that is so impressive, as if plotting a coup is not a damn thing. And this got me like, how the hell did he think that tactics up and got the whole 3 whooping battalion on his side, and both the plotting of the coup without Western influence was completely airtight, that no information leaked out just for the purpose of knowledge, be it evil or for good cause. We got to learn, and here is the kicker. He is not a captain but general. Like, how didn't he got greedy and just move one with all that pile of money in his possession? There's no army officer in his rank that thinks of compromising his own investment or safety. This coup is often left for boys, however. Since US General Solomon Lang decided to pull the plug, I guess that is the reason, coupled with President of Ivory Coast being more on the side of the Western influences than putting Ivorian first. You know how this all started and where it's going, the full story of how it got to this point. A change had occurred quietly, almost invisibly. This was not the kind of event you read about in sensational headlines because it's not in favor of the West. At least not immediately. There were no sounds of gunfire for the people at the back seat, no fireworks, no panicked crowds fleeing through the streets. It was, by all accounts, a remarkably calm affair. The architects of this change, whoever they were, had clearly prioritized something other than overt force. They sought a different kind of impact. A psychological one, perhaps. The old certainties were about to be challenged. To understand the events of that May morning in 2025, one must look back. Not just weeks or months, but years. The political landscape of Ivory Coast had been complex for a long time. There were undercurrents of dissatisfaction. Many citizens felt a growing distance between themselves and those in power. Promises had been made, often with great fanfare, but the reality on the ground for many remained unchanged. This created a fertile ground for questions. President Alassane Ouattara administration had on paper overseen a period of economic growth. Statistics were often quoted. International partners offered praise. Yet beneath these headline figures, a different story was being told in hushed tones that only play well with foreign interests against the vast majority population of the citizens of Ivorian, who has took the street by storm in protest to demand for good governance, seeking military intervention as it seems all hope is lost. People spoke of a political class that seemed more interested in its own continuation than in the genuine welfare of the populace. Here is another dirty plot: the Western politicians who are always ready to dethrone African-elected president after first term if he's doing better for his people against their interests simply flip off the switch about Alassane Ouattara third term, which birthed the need of military intervention. Else he will forever remain in the office serving the Western blueprint interests, which is anti-Ivorian, and that is the last straw that breaks camel's back. Let's be honest, Alassane Ouattara is doing what 98% African presidents are doing, including Nigeria, IMF president, you can recall. IMF was praising Mr. Tinubu, the current president of Nigeria, as being the best president in 2025. That's literally telling you that Nigerian citizens and their economy must be hitting rocks, and their citizens choking on it, drinking lava from volcano as champagne, either crying for help or dying in silence. With loads of security unrest and inflation hitting the roof, and worst of all, living standards below poverty line. In a nutshell, a living hell. Bloody civilians makes fantastic politicians, not leadership. The spirit. May he willing, but the flesh is weaker than fresh clay due to fear of Western influences, economic hitman contractors. And that's why military with purpose and vision like Ibrahim Traore is the idea president Africa needs, not crazy demonstration elected president. For instance, the best president Nigerian have had from democracy was Musa Yar'Adua and Goodluck Ebele Jonathan. However, their positive impacts shortly lived before Western influences threatening their life, and be my guest. Goodluck in fear stepped down within being defeated in a credible election as Obama urged Nigerians to vote for the next chapter, and ever since that day, Nigerian leaves became mainstream of poverty scam. The fear of Western influence is paramount. That's why Western imposed democracy on Africa. However, if we look at history, there is no nations that ever made it into stability and industrialization through democracy. Just name one, and what you get is zero. Russia, China versus India and Nigeria. It's a familiar story in many places, of course, but here it felt particularly acute. The concept of true national sovereignty was a recurring theme in private conversations. Had the country ever truly escaped the long shadows of its colonial past? A younger generation, connected and informed, was less willing to accept the status quo. They yearned for something more. This silent build-up of pressure was the invisible context for the unthinkable revolution. That brings us to today's video sponsorship. Meet the Wolfbox G900 Tri-Pro Mirror Dashcam. And let me tell you, this product bags more punches than Mike Tyson uppercut, enough cutting-edge technological features that will make James Bond blush. This isn't just another dashcam, it's a complete driving assistance solution, a game-changer that offers next-level protection, clarity and peace of mind. With the sharp rise in unpredictable road accidents these days, from reckless drivers to hit-and-runs and even false claims, it gets interesting. Cops will not like this one bit, and that's why you need it, as it instantly gives you that bold edge over harassment. If you've heard James Bond said, perhaps you forgot my hidden...
You failed to take into account my hidden assets.
Got my hidden assets. Wolfbox G900 Tri-Pro comes as one with that said. If you only live once, then make it count by making smart decisions by getting yourself a Wolfbox G900 Tri-Pro. You need more than just good instincts behind the wheel. You need a guardian, a watchful eye, almost like God's eyes on the road. First off, let's talk image quality. The G900 Tri-Pro captures the road ahead in breathtaking 4K, your rear view in crisp 2.5K, and the interior cabin in 1080p Full HD simultaneously. Whether it's license plates, sudden movements, or unexpected events, nothing escapes its triple lens coverage. And here's where it gets really smart. With built-in voice control, you can operate the dashcam hands-free. Keep your eyes on the road while commanding your cam to lock videos, take photos, or switch views. It features 5.8 GHz Wi-Fi, ensuring lightning-fast video downloads to your phone, and integrated GPS that logs your speed, route, and coordinates for extra protection in case of disputes. But what really sets it apart? That stunning 12-inch full-touch display. Bright, responsive, and easy to navigate, giving you full control and visibility in real time. From daily commutes to long road trips, the Wolfbox G900 Tri-Pro is the ultimate driving companion. Smart, sleek, and reliable. It's more than worth every penny. Stay smart, stay safe. Rest assured, with Wolfbox watching your front, back, and everything in between. With that said, let's get back on the today's show, shall we? Ivory Coast is a land blessed with resources: cocoa, coffee, oil, minerals. This natural wealth should, in theory, translate into prosperity for all its citizens. However, the reality was and is far more complicated. A significant portion of the population felt bypassed by this wealth. They saw the gleaming towers in Abidjan. They heard the reports of GDP growth, but their daily lives told a different story. The question of who truly benefited from the nation's resources was a persistent one. Large multinational corporations played a significant role in key sectors. This is not unusual, of course, but concerns were often voiced about the terms of these arrangements. Were they fair? Did they genuinely serve the long-term interests of Ivory Coast? For many ordinary Ivorians, life was a struggle. The cost of living seemed to constantly rise. Access to quality education and healthcare remained a challenge for many. Young people, even with qualifications, faced an uncertain job market. This created a deep sense of economic injustice, a feeling that the system was rigged. This economic unease was a powerful, if often unspoken, force. It fueled a desire for fundamental change. Careful, watch this video clip, and I will be back shortly after this video, and I will be sharing more so we know how this all started and where it's going, the full story of how it got to this point.
Abidjan, the city awoke to an eerie calm. Military vehicles patrolled the streets, not to enforce fear, but to assure stability. Radio stations, long censored under government control, buzzed with something new: expectancy, anticipation, a quiet revolution nearing its final act. At the center of this moment was a single message, broadcast anonymously at 3:27 a.m. on all major frequencies. Alassane Ouattara is expected to resign publicly in the next few hours. Prepare for transition, prepare for ownership. The country didn't panic. It exhaled. For over a decade, Ouattara had reigned as Ivory Coast's unmovable president, first hailed as a reformer, later condemned as a constitutional manipulator, a leader whose grip on power came not from consensus, but from courts, contracts, and the quiet cooperation of foreign backers. But the streets had changed. This was no longer the Ivory Coast of IMF blueprints and French speeches on regional stability. This was a nation reborn in the fire of its own awakening. And the man once thought untouchable was now waiting, surrounded, watched, but not yet broken. In military compounds, the final preparations were underway. Journalists were summoned, cameras were cleaned. The national flag was hoisted, not for show, but for symbolism. It wasn't just about removing a president. It was about retiring a chapter of African submission disguised as diplomacy. He came with Western praise. Now he would leave with African pressure. The world was watching, and the clock was ticking. Every resignation has a history, every downfall, a trail of ignored warnings. The impending resignation of Alassane Ouattara was not born in a day. It was the inevitable climax of a decade-long dance between illusion and control. When he came to power in 2011, Ouattara was framed as a savior. A technocrat with World Bank credentials, a stabilizer after post-election chaos, a partner to the West, a model of progress in Francophone Africa. But beneath the suit and praise, something else was forming. Year after year, term after term, the line between reformer and ruler blurred. In 2020, Ouattara controversially ran for a third term, citing a constitutional reset. Protests exploded, civilians were killed, opponents jailed or exiled. The international community, they issued mild statements and moved on. Because for them, Ouattara was still predictable. And predictability is the currency of global influence. But inside Ivory Coast, patience wore thin. Unemployment rose, public services collapsed, corruption bloomed like mold beneath development contracts. Meanwhile, French troops maintained a training presence, and international firms controlled mining rights from Abidjan to the Burkina Faso border. People were no longer just frustrated, they were aware. Then came Burkina Faso, then Mali, then Niger, and with each fallen leader, the question grew louder. If they could do it, why not us? Inside the Ivorian military, a faction began to form. Young, disciplined, nationalist, led by officers who had trained not in Paris, but in Ouagadougou and Conakry. They didn't want chaos. They wanted clarity. And in the early hours of a quiet Monday, they took control. Without a shot fired, Ouattara was placed under protective custody. The presidency sealed. The people informed. He will speak. He will resign. And we will begin again. History is not written by those who win power. It is written by those who let go of it, too late. When a king loses his throne, the silence in the palace becomes louder than the people outside. Inside a secure facility outside Yamoussoukro, Alassane Ouattara sat in quiet isolation. No entourage, no red carpets, no handlers, just military guards and a folded statement in his hands, the speech he was expected to read. It wasn't a script from the generals, it wasn't revenge, it was an invitation to accountability. The document opened with 4 simple words: to the people of Ivory Coast. It ended with the most anticipated line in Ivorian history. I hereby resign. But Ouattara hesitated, not out of arrogance, but fear. Fear of being abandoned by the same powers that once championed him. Fear that a decade of global partnerships, strategic alliances, and institutional trust had amounted to nothing more than borrowed legitimacy. And he was right. France, his long-standing backer, had not intervened. The US issued a generic call for a peaceful transition, and ECOWAS, always cautious, remained silent. The man who once moved with presidential motorcades now paced alone. Meanwhile, General Sékou Doumbia, leader of the Military Transition Council, reviewed the logistics of the upcoming press event. He had made it clear, this will not be a spectacle, this will be closure. Doumbia knew that forcing a resignation meant nothing if the people didn't witness dignity in departure. The broadcast had been scheduled. Reporters were en route. All that remained was a decision. Ouattara was given time, an hour to reflect, to read, to choose. Outside, the city waited, not with rage, but with readiness. Markets remained open, schools resumed, but eyes never left the screens. Because at any moment, the curtain would rise on an unthinkable scene. A man who once stood as Africa's modern face, now speaking as its fallen memory. Every dictatorship ends, but not every one ends with a camera.
When people hear the word coup, images of tanks on the streets often come to mind. Soldiers storming buildings, leaders arrested in dramatic raids. The recent events in Ivory Coast, however, defied these expectations. It was a takeover, yes, but it was executed with a remarkable lack of overt force. There was no violence, there was no chaos. It was, in its own way, a meticulously choreographed performance. The group behind this action, who later identified themselves simply as the custodians of sovereignty, appeared to have a different strategy. Their focus was not on military might. Instead, they targeted key communication networks, state television, radio stations, internet infrastructure. They understood that in the modern age, control of information is paramount. It was a very 21st century approach. The defining moment of this silent coup came not through an armed confrontation, but through a television screen. President Kofi Yao, the man who had led Ivory Coast for several years, appeared live on national television. He was seated at his presidential desk. He looked tired, he looked perhaps a little bewildered, but he was there, and he was about to speak. The nation, by now alerted to expect an important announcement, watched. What followed was not a defiant speech, nor was it a call to resistance. Instead, President Yao delivered what could only be described as a confession. Not a personal confession of petty crimes, but a confession on behalf of the state he led. He spoke of the immense pressures, the external influences that shaped national policy. He talked about agreements signed that did not, in his view, truly serve the Ivorian people. It was extraordinary. He spoke of a system that had, over decades, compromised true sovereignty. He detailed how economic decisions were often made with foreign interests taking precedence. He confessed that the nation's path was not entirely its own. His voice was steady. The words, however, were explosive. He was, in effect, dismantling his own legacy, and more importantly, he was validating the very concerns that had been whispered for years. The implications were staggering. Here was the head of state, seemingly under duress, yet speaking with clarity, confirming the deepest fears of many. After President Yao's broadcast ended, an unusual calm settled over Ivory Coast. There were no widespread celebrations in the streets, nor were there protests against the change. It was as if the entire nation was collectively holding its breath. People gathered in small groups, in homes, in cafes, discussing what they had just witnessed, trying to understand its full meaning. The speech was the only topic of conversation. The words of the president, though likely spoken under new direction, resonated deeply. For many, it was a confirmation of what they had long suspected. The feeling was not one of triumph, but of a somber vindication. The problems were now out in the open, acknowledged at the highest level. This in itself felt like a significant step, but what would come next? That was the question on everyone's lips. The custodians of sovereignty issued brief statements assuring the population of their commitment to peace and order. They spoke of a transitional period, a period for reflection and national dialogue. The atmosphere was one of profound uncertainty, yes, but also, for some, a flicker of hope. In an age of instant global communication, one might expect an event of this magnitude to dominate international headlines. A national leader live on television, effectively confessing to the systemic failings and external manipulation of his country. It was a story with all the hallmarks of a major news event, yet the coverage in most mainstream international media outlets was surprisingly muted, almost non-existent. Some initial brief reports surfaced, mentioning a developing situation in Ivory Coast, an unconfirmed change in leadership. But the depth, the nuance, the sheer strangeness of President Yao's broadcast, these aspects were largely absent. The story, it seemed, did not fit the preferred narratives, or perhaps it was deemed too complex, too uncomfortable. It was a curious silence, a telling silence. Why this lack of attention? One can only speculate. Perhaps powerful global interests preferred the situation not to be amplified. The events in Ivory Coast and the way they were or were not reported did not occur in a vacuum. Across the African continent, there has been a growing movement, a new consciousness, a desire to redefine relationships with the rest of the world, and more importantly, for African nations to define their own destinies. This is not always loud. It is often a subtle shift in thinking, in expectations. This rising consciousness is particularly strong among the youth, a generation connected by technology. Less burdened by the direct memory of colonial rule, but acutely aware of its lingering legacies. They are asking difficult questions, challenging old assumptions, demanding accountability, not just from their own leaders, but from the international systems that shape their world. It's a quiet revolution of the mind. The unique method employed in Ivory Coast, using the existing leader to deliver a message of systemic critique, is perhaps a reflection of this evolving approach. It suggests a search for new tactics, ways to bring about change that are less about destruction and more about a fundamental shift in perspective. What does the future hold for Ivory Coast, and what are the broader implications of this unthinkable revolution? It is, of course, too early to say with any certainty. The path ahead is undoubtedly complex. The custodians of sovereignty have set a high bar with their initial actions and rhetoric. Translating these into tangible, sustainable change will be an immense challenge. The world will be watching, even if quietly. The concept of independence itself is being re-examined. Political independence, achieved decades ago by most African nations, was only the first step. Now the focus is shifting towards economic sovereignty, towards mental decolonization, towards building societies that are truly self-determined. This requires more than just changing leaders. It requires changing mindsets and changing systems profoundly. If the Ivorian model of a non-violent, message-focused transition proves successful in the long run, it could offer a new template, a way for nations to address deep-seated issues of governance and external influence without resorting to widespread conflict. It is a path fraught with peril, but it also holds a degree of promise. a promise of a more mature, more thoughtful approach to national renewal. In my critical analysis, this whole story points towards just one thing: African true sovereignty, to have realized its full potential to explore, participate and thrive than survive, even though if this military coup hasn't occurred physically, it has already occurred mentally. And if he did resign live on TV, as the military are currently pushing for, as alleged, the information flying over the internet, one thing is for sure: this coup has occurred mentally, and its shockwave will serve as a stark reminder that in a daring moment like this, African military will be last hope of African, as they aren't easily manipulated after talking risk-plotting coup and successfully pull it off. There is already existing realities and trajectory through which this bumpy ride is going, and takes footsteps of Captain Ibrahim Traore. So guys, tell me what you think about this in comments section. Bye for now, see you in comments section. Now if you will excuse me generals, I have a flight to catch.